Space is cold, very cold, but thanks to the magics and other effects woven into my attire, it wasn't even noticeable as I was leading my small team deeper into this structure we were investigating. We had discovered it while tracking a group of pirates, as this was strangely the one place they seemed to avoid, despite it seeming to be a perfect potential base of operations. This place is old, Sarge. Mazzy, floating along, surrounded with a soft golden nimbus of energy that was providing her both air and warmth within this vacuum. The entire outer structure appears to be open to space. The damage to the outer hull indicates it's due to impacts over a long time frame. A score of centuries at the very least. Nada's voice was slightly shifted by the speaker in his walker. Little over 6 foot in height, and controlled via an interface that was mounted on his armless shoulder. It kept him warm, safe, and equipped with an array of sensors and other equipment that we would not have been able to carry normally. Still can't get a precise match on the design. I still say it's a Starfort model, but there are too many inconsistencies. As the lamps from Nada's walker made wide sweeps of the halls and rooms we passed through or traveled in, it became clear quite quickly we were not the first explorers, as frozen bits of blood or other indications of previous attempts could be seen. But strangely, no gear, and no piece of a body larger than a finger, or maybe a part of a hand. Captain, this is Sarge. How do you read? Pretty clear, Sarge. Nautilus link is solid. We're seeing what you are seeing. Excellent. Now what is the first problem we have seen thus far? I could hear the annoyance in the captain's breath. She was not a fan of me leading her to a conclusion. The fact you haven't found any equipment or evidence of who or what these bodies were or how they got... Damn it! I now heard the wry annoyance as she ordered the little ones, who were already orbiting in their prospectors, to begin deep scans looking for any traces of the ships that had to have carried some of these people here. On it, Sarge! Night rock out! Nada was chuckling. You don't cut any of them a bit of slack, do you? I laughed. Not while on the clock. Just like they better not cut me any either. I looked at Mazzy, who had reached the end of the large room we were traversing. The door she was in front of was a massive bulkhead, leading into one of the major power centers of the structure, by the looks of it. Sarge, if you could handle the controls, Nada and I shall pin the bulkhead open. Mazzy was still floating a few inches off the deck. Her training as a student of the Fist combined with the vast amount of augmentations she had as a Christon allowed her a variety of flight options, all granting her a smooth and efficient speed that she used in quite the flourishing manners. Of course, I began working on the console, and I noted just as Nada could not match the structure that we were in exactly, the control systems for this place seemed off. I could not put my finger on it exactly, but every system I had bypassed thus far felt wrong. Too much or too little delay on one, recycle rates off on another. But none had the same difference. This one was acting as it had never been used before, cycling through status and verifications on boot sequences. A couple moments later, however, bulkhead began to slide open as normal and the display looked like you would expect. Strange. The others, Nada and Mazi placed metastatic lock pins at the corners of the opening. Little wonders of magic technology. Once activated, it would take a near insurmountable amount of force to move any one of them, as they were linked not only to each other, but through magical means, the surrounding reality itself. We had pinned all the bulkheads we had encountered so far, which had allowed the signal from the Night Rock to reach this deep with so little interference. That was until the energies from within this bulkhead made their presence known, mere moments after the pins were set. The lieutenant spoke up at that point. "Start. This is LT. Burst comms only. All readings distorted, even from Nada. Over." "LT, Sarge. Confirm burst comm only. Will record and transmit every 30 seconds. Confirmed LT. Over." "Sarge, LT. Confirmed 30-minute transmit cycle. Be safe. Out." By the 9 and 4, welcome back my perceptive patrons to the library, where today we are looking at one of the most recognized, if little understood, threats to the realms and her future. That being the Antani, the mysterious extragalactic monsters that seem to have followed the Teltechians from their original galaxy to ours, the Nine-Wing Galaxy. As always, as you well know, this will be but an introduction, as I do not have access to a lot of information regarding these invaders. Of course, as more information comes to light and within my access, I will bring it to you for your consideration. Now, with that said, what I can say is that the Antani are a collection of large, powerful twisters of reality, recording as wielding nearly any type of arcane, elemental, or other metaphysical energies, and displaying powers and abilities just as varied and strange. They are an extremely difficult group to quantify in a meaningful manner, aside from a few universal truths that can be derived from the information we know. Among these truths is the simple fact that they are very dependent on certain energies or material types for their own growth and sustainment. However, while this would normally be a weakness, their very nature lends itself to having the ability to corrupt and pervert nearby energies into more easily acceptable and digestible forms passively. Now, this will still only allow them to survive in a torpor-like state if they cannot get the required amounts of energies, which can be incredibly immense given the fact that the required energies, if they are absent the ones they need, their conversion process is horrendously wasteful. Thus, for a single guy, the smallest of the Antani, an entire active volcano may be required to maintain it at an active level. Or he might feast on some Teltechians and stay active for a century or more. The exact mechanics at work are still unconfirmed in any great detail. However, the next of these truths is they grow in size and power as they consume, even in their torpor states. This is a very pressing concern for reasons that will be elaborated on in just a bit. But as the first contact with the Antani resulted in a single Gigai managing to fully cleanse the first ever extrastellar colony in the early days of exploration of the Age of Stars, despite there being an entire garrison of Trannis-trained warriors specifically trained for this first extrasolar colony. That basic threat is bad enough for now. Now, the third known constant of the Antani, as alluded to several times before, is that they can pervert and subvert nearly any form of metaphysical energy or object, even capable of apparently breaking across lines of reality or planal lines to assault divine beings within their own home realms, as was noted to have happened to the unenlightened races of the world that would become known today as Nuoth. The Antani deposed and consumed the gods of that world and replaced them, before finding the world far too energy poor for them to maintain activity at any great level. The Teltekians that they were originally hunting that had been living there had been driven nearly to extinction, having to hide deep into the forests and swamps and other such hidden places. They also lacked the materials for them to properly employ their own Teltekian abilities, which actually saw them survive the hunts. As, without a scent to follow as it were, the Antani quickly found the search far more trouble and waste than it was worth, and thus went into torpor. Now, the worst part of the third fact is that it makes the Antani nearly impossible to easily track or search for with any ability that is derived from magic or advanced technology, combined with their methods of travel and spread, that being in their crystalline shard ships, which will bury themselves deep into a planet's crust, acting as dark seeds for future chaos. The threat of the Antani is an ever-present one. However, the shard ships do require huge amounts of power and resources for them to create, but are often the last things a planet will produce before being left behind as a dry rock floating in space. They are an intelligent species, however, and will gladly take the opportunity to use ships or stations as bases, taking advantage of the vast amounts of refined materials and energy production capabilities, draining them just as they would a planet. Typically, a single specimen will take over and set into place a central focus for all the energies and resources to be pulled, perverting the ship's or station's own systems to facilitate this. The rest of the station or structure will begin to fall to ruin as more and more is taken, even if it is done over centuries. The Antani's warping effects also tend to cause errors and malfunction in equipment and technology, further compounding the danger they present in such a setting. Looking at Nada and Mazzy, I nodded, and we made our way in, stepping across the threshold and into the weakly held but fully breathable atmosphere that the fields were still holding in place in this area. Sounds became real again. The sputtering of conduits and consoles could now be heard, along with high-pitched sounds of glass or crystals resounding randomly and often. Even with the atmosphere, it was cold and I shivered. Readings are confused. Layout seems to indicate a Type 4 power control plant center. Nada seemed to get lost in the streams of data from his sensors as he was trying to figure out what we were looking at. Masnoa, for her part, floated with her smooth precision over to one of the main control consoles and softly landed before starting to work on it. Wait, landed? Cold? Shit! I snapped my eyes to Mazzy, who was already looking at me, as if knowing I was about to give an important order. Flash code! Track fans! No! I almost screamed, but managed to keep an even but forced tone. It had been years since I'd given that order. Centuries, in fact. But the golden blur of light that took Nada's walker at the waist, lifted, and carried it out of the compartment proved that our training was more than well enough ingrained, even now. Turning to escape myself and launching myself into a full run, but not using any of my abilities to speed myself up. My efforts to be a distraction and bait bore fruit as a burst of dark fire came from an upper deck. Dodging easily and spinning to avoid the next burst, this time an icy shard of lava. I confirmed what I had feared. Antani. Seeing the bulkhead shift and seal around the pins, star metal flowing and shaping in a way that should not be possible, I knew I was trapped. And as I heard another 4 set of feet on the deck plating resound from various parts of the power room, I knew what we had stumbled upon. A nest. Hearing an even heavier set of feet from far deeper in the chamber, echoing, my heart sank. Gigai? I could handle. I could even kill a few of them. But a Titani? Or a Colossi? That made things far less clear. The bigger ones were orders of magnitude stranger and stronger. However, I made use of my speed and my reflexes to begin crossing the chamber in an erratic pattern, jumping, diving, and flying from station to station, visiting each several times in the minutes of dodging the frenzies of attacks from the Gigai, who did their best to remain hidden behind pillars, cross beams, and other obstructions. To their confusion, I refrained from using anything but my beater in its whip form, and I was only using that to maximize my mobility. By the time I had finished my efforts, and I could hear the consoles blink and beep, I was sure there were only 6 Gigai, and only 1 larger of their kind. The larger one I had not been able to see. He had remained hidden. Not an easy task, which made me all the more nervous. Landing on the center deck, I could hear sounds grow even thicker and easier to discern as the atmosphere increased with more pressure. I could hear the breathing of all 7 of them as I landed, including the big one. Behind me, 50 feet, and I was nearing the edge of his reach. The others were driving me towards him. Not bad for invading Locust. Smiling at the sounds of their feral hunger, like starving dogs slowly closing the circle around a bleeding but dangerous beast. For the first time, I pulled my sidearm and launched myself up, flying at top speed to the apex of the main chamber. Arcs and bolts, gouts and waves of energy chasing me as I fired at an emergency latch. And, hitting it with my first shot, it sprang to life. Slides and blocks of metal dropped, and emergency vents opened, initiating a depressurization of the chamber, and taking me along with it for a direct ejection outside the facility. All the atmosphere carried me along the minutes-long journey, bouncing and banging me around at each turn, before spitting me out at a significant speed and with quite the spin. The vortex of deadly energies that was also pulled into the vent behind me began to close the distance with frightening speed, and as I took a tightly balled and defensive position as I could manage in those moments, my robe's lengths of fabric automatically forming a shield around me, I felt the sudden tingle of translocation, and found myself on the Night Rock. Nada was at the controls for the translocator, and he was furious. "What kind of fool are you, Han? There was over a half dozen, and you tried to fight them yourself?" "Didn't try to fight him, Nada." His stunned expression gave me the room I needed. "Bridge, this is Sarge. Fill that vent with anti-rounds. Full burst." "Captain, didn't miss a beat." "RA firing, Sarge. Pattern 9, burst fire. Away." I could feel the slight vibration as the launchers finished firing the rounds. "Nav is pulling us back to a safe distance." "Good. Get the prospectors back locked down. We will send them out to confirm the kills, but there were more than Gigai in there." Nada's face finally composed itself. If what you say is true, you better hope those rounds don't malfunction. He had to nearly run to keep up with my stride as I headed to the bridge. Nada. If they don't malfunction, they're not working. I said it with a wicked smile, and his look at first was surprised, then became bemused. Let me guess. Some bit of AD special kit? Something just in case you ran into them during your operations? As we entered the bridge and could see the station on the main viewer, and the way it was beginning to warp and bend under the forces of the unleashed anti-rounds. Yeah, the sun came up with them. They destabilize local reality in a way that is only compounded by the presence of any other distorting effects, such as the Antani. However, the more distortion, the worse it becomes, and the more rapidly everything involved in that part of reality begins being converted into one thing. Nada looked up at me seriously. And what is that? As the ship shuddered, even at this distance from the waves of backwash from the process that was ongoing, I answered. Gravity. As if on cue, the entire station, and everything for a mile or 5 around it, collapsed into a tiny black hole that would blink itself out in about 20 minutes to an hour. Nada just stood jaw agape. You just carry these around? He honestly seemed in shock. Of course not. We got the blueprint. I just smiled. Mazzy must have put it together on the way out and prepped the rounds as I did my part inside, raising the pressure in the Atmos systems and flooding the chamber with low amounts of randomized energy for them to naturally pervert, adding tinder to the fire that the round she was preparing would set off. As the prospectors launched to ensure that none of them had escaped by some act of insanity, I looked over at Mazzy. Well done. Her simple nod was the only reply. Nada was shaking his head somewhere between exasperated and amused. I looked at the LT and tossed him a data crystal from my belt. Log it and file it with our AD contacts. 6 Gigi, 1 larger. And the nest. Do not let them lowball the reward just because we're not in the AD anymore. They're still getting credit. There were open bounties on all corners of the realms for the slaying of an Antani or a multiple. However, doing it this way, the kills would be counted as those executed by Criterion. Honor to the family. But, of course, there was no sense to not get paid for the work either, as this would have nothing to do with the pirates we were hunting. Now that's clear why they didn't use this station. The loss of the station as salvage is disappointing, but the bounties, plus the knowledge that we'd made the realms a better place today, was an acceptable substitute. But as dangerous as the Antani are on a ship or a station, it truly pales in comparison to the threat they can present on a planet. As they can bury themselves deeply in the surface of a planet by crashing their shard ships into it, as described earlier, they can lie dormant for years, decades, and centuries, drawing power and energy from not only the surrounding area, but in some cases, the planet in total, and growing. Often, this can result in an increase not in growth for the antennae, but an increase in their numbers with the creation of a new Gigai. Encased in its own shard, they will either bud off from the original, becoming a nest of crystals, or be launched, often into space. Sometimes it's only for them to come down and land and bury themselves on another part of the planet to further the process of its consumption. Planets that are particularly rich in energy, be it geological, metaphysical, or other, can often be converted into massive nest planets that will launch shard after shard after shard into the dark at random to hopefully and eventually seed other planets to repeat the process. While this entire ordeal varies in the amount of time it will take, the amount of energy, or the amount of antennae that can be created or sustained in such a way, it is rather secondary to what damage an active antennae can cause. Able to use attacks of prodigious strength and power, and able to subvert the attacks and defenses of their victims, they are a terrifying foe for the unprepared or unaware. While active, they are able to draw in and both pervert and consume a much larger amount of energy and resources. And their effects move from the subtle, such as rot setting in a bit faster or crops not doing quite as well as they should, to far more perverse and extreme changes, such as the slightest cuts becoming acidically rotted on the spot, or crops growing hateful and becoming carriers of pox and disease. Indeed, the act of fighting them must be done with care, as the very powers of an attack can end up feeding and empowering the antennae. However, despite their perversions, they do seem bound by some simple physics in some interesting ways. For example, pure kinetic attacks, such as striking them with a melee weapon or an arrow, does seem capable to be able to deal real harm. However, magically augmented versions of those attacks are often more harmful to the attacker than the antennae. Likewise, lasers, divine energy, arcane energies, elemental energies, nearly any other type of raw energy attack at best is only partially effective when employed against an antennae. They are, of course, subject to things like gravity, but even then they can endure a much higher amount of it than most races within the realms. But they are not immune. This combination of qualities creates a very tough foe, and that is all before the actual warriors of the Antani are discussed. Only suspected to be seen on a few occasions thus far, but confirmed to exist by the Teltechians, whose battle and war with these beasts is longer than their knowledge of how it started. The most normally seen of the antennae are the general populace, and there does apparently exist an elite caste amongst their number. These antennae in sky are far more powerful, and appear to not only wear equipment, armor, and other gears, and wield weaponry, but they are far more precise and potent with their use of reality bending and perverting effects. Unfortunately, as mentioned, there only exists reports of sightings, and so far no progress on being able to track any of the antennae, let alone a subsection of their number, has been made. This leaves the realm in a position of reaction and preparation. After the ending days of the war with the Scriptorum, and the shard storms that occurred during that time, where dozens upon dozens of shard ships appeared and made planetfall over many of the planets of the realms, with only a few of them able to prevent or intercept the attack. These few planets plus the home realm, which for some reason did not fall under a shard storm, suspected as the protections laid by the V's. These are the only planets that are therefore safe from an Antani threat for the moment. Any other realm could, at any time, have antennae of unknown size and an unknown number appear and begin wreaking havoc. Thus, open bounties and vast treasures for those that find and slay these dangers are the forefront of the preparation efforts. It is known that the hunters actually have specialists in anti-Antani combat, that are to be dispatched in response to confirmed Antani activity. Despite this, it is also assumed that most, if not all, other planets in the cluster will have antennae on them at some point, as they can lay dormant for ages before becoming an active and serious issue far too quickly for most to counter. The general ban on further sovereignty colonies begins to become a bit more clear on its reasoning when you take this into account. And with this basic overview of the antennae and the threat they pose concluded, I hope you have a bit clearer understanding about these strange yet worrisome invaders. As always, my perceptive patrons, I would like to thank you for your time and your attention. Now, until I see you once more within the halls of the library, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. Nada and Mazzy sat across my desk from me. The captain and the LT had just left after handing in their report that there was no sign of any remains of either the station or of the Antani. After confirming we were back en route to our next lead on the pirates we were originally tracking, they excused themselves. Mazzy had been quiet since my return, and Nada was looking back and forth between us. "Lady, if you don't say your piece." He left the statement unfinished as Mazzy gave him a look I've seen break veterans. But so called out, she began. "Sarge, putting aside the sheer insanity of what you did there." She gestured to the looping replay of data from my suit along with what they had managed to get from the station's various systems, and as I'd open as much of it to the ship as I could while I had the chance. "There is a Class 4, 15-foot Unioni alloyed question that you have done your damn best to avoid at every turn. You could have been slaughtered in there, Sarge, so I am done waiting. I am done being patient. You will answer me now. If that thing is what I think it is, why, in the name of the family, are you not using it?" Nada seemed to flinch and shrink into his chair, and then a voice echoed from the far side of my office, from the still open doorframe. "Because, Miss Noah of the Dreamer's Fist, the good sergeant hasn't finished equipping it. Have you, Han?" I looked to the voice and realized why it was familiar. Seeing the lithe elven woman in standard Criterion combat fatigues, lacking any insignia except for the embossed shape of a skull on her shoulders. "Major General Cristania? It's been a long time. Now what business does the brute second in command have with some washed up retirees?" I was trying to keep a light tone. "Got your bounty report. Though I thought you might want to know. Someone made sure it wasn't going to make it any higher than me." She smiled. "Besides, the bounty needed to be paid in person due to its amount." With that, she tossed a large shoulder bag on the desk. It landed with a solid thud. "Very good work. You do us proud, Sarge. But now that that's done, time for you to get back to doing real work." With that, she turned with a flourish, and from her offhand an envelope flew across the office and arced its way perfectly under my hand. "By the family, good fortune." And with that, the three of us were alone again. Looking at my hand and the envelope now under it, Mazzy looked at me and spoke only 3 letters, questioning in the softest of supplication and fear. H-O-D? As I opened and read the contents of the envelope, I too began to feel similarly.